All right, it is the second day of our Holy Week, I guess, series. Each one of these videos is going to come out in the morning. Yesterday, Ronnie handled the triumphant entry, which had its own, I guess, tone associated with it. And today, we end up on what some have called Holy Monday, or even one guy that I was listening to called it Disruption Monday. So Jesus and the disciples are actually staying outside of Jerusalem. The Passover, I guess, festival or feast is getting ready to happen, really celebrating God passing over Israel when they were in Egypt. It's the biggest festival of the year. So Jesus and the disciples are staying outside about an hour to hour and a half walk away. While they are walking towards Jerusalem on this Monday, they end up coming across a fig tree. And from far away, it looks fine, but the closer they get, they realize it doesn't bear fruit. Jesus isn't going to fully explain what's going on here until later, and so we're not going to get too much into it. So as Jesus leaves the fig tree and they enter into Jerusalem, there's obviously going to be a couple different emotions going on. You have the religious leaders that still want to kill him, and you have the people who celebrated his triumphal entry the day before, who are still excited that he's around. Him and his disciples end up walking into the outer courts of the temple, and he's met with something that caused him to go kind of through an array of emotion. He sees this place of worship that is set up as a market, and he begins to flip tables. Some talk about him braiding a whip, some talking about him flipping tables, but at the end of the day, he starts to drive out the money changers and the salesmen that are in that court. Now, this is a huge moment because yesterday you had the triumphal entry, and you already had people talking about how what were they going to do about Jesus. You had already people disagreeing with how he was being celebrated, and now you have him not just taking on the celebration, but then in turn flipping these tables over and calling out the religious leaders of the day. This was a huge turning point. There was no going back from what he had done here. The Jews, the religious leaders of the day, were going to kill him. Why would Jesus do this? The simple answer is that he knew he needed to go to the cross. He knew that this was his ultimate purpose here on earth, and so this is what he was going to do. But I think there's actually something entrenched within the scripture there in Luke chapter 19 that kind of points to what he was actually frustrated with in the moment, which is ultimately a foreshadowing of what his purpose is here on earth. We see this in Luke chapter 19, particularly in verse 46, where it says this: My house will be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers. Now, this verse, in verse 46, he's actually quoting two other scriptures. One is Jeremiah 7:11. And so in Jeremiah 7:11, the den of robbers part, that's what that 7:11 is quoting from Jeremiah. All right, but the second reference that he was quoting was Isaiah 56 verse 7, and this is what it says: These I will bring to my holy mountain and give them joy in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and sacrifices will be accepted on my altar, for my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations. I'm going to repeat that. My house will be called a house of prayer for all nations. And so I think the thing that Jesus was most frustrated about in that moment was that this place that was supposed to be a house of prayer for all nations, right, was being taken up by these money changers and vendors. And so Jesus in that moment was signifying, was showing that this was the heart of God, that his purpose here on earth was not just for the Jews, but also for the Gentiles, to restore a place of worship for people from all backgrounds and nations. And so here, for his time here on earth, that's what he was trying to show them in that moment. But it ultimately foreshadows for you and for me that he wants to open up access to God in the same way that he was trying to open it up for the Gentiles in this moment. Instead of it being taken up by the religious elite, anybody could come before him. So as I wrap this up, I really have one question that I want you to ponder. And I'm going to make sure I read it so I get it right. The purpose, this market took up a space of worship in the temple, preventing people from using it for its purpose. As you examine your own life, are there any distractions taking up space in your life, preventing you from worship? As part of your worship, I'm asking that as you examine, as you reflect on those things, that you would just lay those before God. Whether we're talking about job-related things, personal distractions, it could be anything. Take those and lay them before Him as you prepare to worship this Holy Week.